Hi, everyone. I'm Marilyn, CEO and founder of Cosmic Centaurs, and your host for today's session, where my co author, Connie Hadley, and I unpack everything about the rituals research that landed us an HBR article. Now, of course, before we begin and before I formally introduce Connie to you, please show us some love. Give this video a like. Share your thoughts in the comments. Ask us questions. Tala will be sharing a little protocol with all of you. We thought we'd bring you into our webinar and try to engage you and interact with you as much as possible. So we'll be sharing a few different emojis that you can use to tell us if you learned something, if you agree with something we say, but also we welcome dissent if you don't agree with something we say. And of course, as always, please, please, please bring your best questions to us. We'll have time later on for a Q&A and a rapid fire. And we look forward to answering all of your questions as we go. Now, before we dive deep into our content for the day, let me quickly introduce my co-author, Dr. Connie Hadley, who is an organizational psychologist and founder of the Institute for Life at Work, as well as a research associate professor at the Boston University Questrom School of Business. She conducts research on employee well-being, relationships, psychological safety, teams, and the future of work. And her goal is to help organizations identify and address pain points to improve work life for all employees. Dr. Hadley's research and commentary has been widely published in HBR, and her work on loneliness, the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, New York Times, Fortune, Wired, Forbes, and other news and academic outlets. Connie, I am so thrilled to be here today with you.
Oh, me too. This is so fun. What a great way to start the week.
Yes, it is Monday morning for you in the US. And so I do agree. It is a great way to start the week. For me, a great way to start the year, if I'm being honest. So, bit of context here for those of you who haven't seen my 6,000 posts about the HBR article that we just published. So, Connie and I and Dr. Maya Mahfouz, who we'll talk about later, we spent the last 3 years together with the Cosmic Centers team researching the impact of team rituals. And what we found is that when we do team rituals right, the impact on individuals is that they're more committed to the purpose of the team. There's an increase in psychological safety, in interpersonal knowledge, and in job satisfaction. Now, who wouldn't want to boost their numbers by 20%, if I'm looking at the lowest value? And thanks to the very thorough and beautiful research that we did over the last 3 years, we were able to publish an article in HBR about it, the surprising power of team ritual. And today we're going to be covering all about the research, the process, our partnership, and of course, what we learned and how to get rituals right. Now, there was a little GIF animation on this slide that was meant to have confetti, but StreamYard didn't want to show it, but that's all right. We have confetti in our hearts. It was an absolute highlight for us as a small company to be able to publish our second article, thanks to our partnership together. So, Connie, let everybody know what we're going to be covering today.
Excellent. And I do miss the confetti, but I like having the confetti in our hearts. So yes, for the next hour, we are going to make this personal. So I talk about research a lot. I could talk about it forever, but this is a personal journey for us. And we're going to kind of ritualize this whole webinar to show you what it can be like in your team. And as part of that, we're going to share knowledge about ourselves to each other, that we have some surprise questions that we don't expect from each other ahead. But also we're going to be sharing with all of you what it was like for us as part of this journey to learn the information we're going to share with you. So we're going to talk about why we did this. We're going to talk about what the rituals are that we studied, as well as ones that we personally have experienced in our coaching and consulting work or our research work, as well as personally. Things we've discovered, things that surprised us. I'm going to give you a little bit more of the backbone of the research that went into our findings in the article. And then, of course, at the end of the day, we're here to help. So we want to help you implement rituals in your own organization in a way that makes sense for you, and they'll give you those kinds of good outcomes. So we're going to give you lots of advice as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to deep dive into the specifics of the research, but maybe just a little bit of backstory here. When we started to look into this, I always like to say that for me, at least, the story of rituals started all the way back when I was a child. And I think that growing up in a community-oriented society, there are a lot of rituals that both come from the spiritual realm, but also that come from us being together as a family. And, one that I always cite, that I talk about often, is our family Sunday lunches. And what they instilled for me and how they taught me about what was important, as a kid. And up until now, if I'm being honest, I'm almost 40. If my family and I are in the same country, then we have no excuse but to be together on Sunday. And they really taught me everything there was about family values. And I think that my exploration of ritual started there. It continued when I became a professional and started learning about Agile and Scrum. And those are project management methodologies that are very rich in rituals. And so as a practitioner, I learned all about them. And then when I went into organizational development, they became a key element of our practice. And it's really what kind of began the curiosity around proving what these rituals could do. And that's kind of when we roped you in, Connie, and you joined us on this research. So tell us a little bit about the last 3 years.
Yes. Well, first of all, we met through a mutual friend, Mark Mortensen, and I've published articles with Mark, and you have also published another HBR article with Mark. Right. So big shout out to him, and thank you to Mark for connecting us. So as I recall it, you sort of cold called me through this reference of Mark. Mark wasn't involved in our first conversation, and you had lots of questions for me, and you were wanting to do something very action oriented, and I was entranced by your enthusiasm and your clear intellect, but I wasn't sure what was going to happen. So the first thing I did is said, let me see your data first. Let me I need to understand this from the scientific standpoint. So you shared with me actually the 2020 Future of Teams survey that you did at Cosmic Centaurs, where you asked a whole bunch of questions about a whole bunch of different aspects of teamwork. And from that, I think we pulled out that, hey, there's something about this idea of sharing knowledge intentionally through rituals that is impacting people positively at work. But it was still kind of a theory at that point. So then we ran 2 different surveys. You're part of the Cosmic Centaurs annual Future Team survey. We became more narrow and focused on this idea about rituals and about how they relate to things like job satisfaction and intention to quit, but also on how well they committed people to the team's purpose and inspired them. And so that was the series that you see on the screen here, the 2021 study, where we found over 500 people or so that yes, mutual knowledge is something that rituals can help promote. And then from that, you get these great team outcomes. And then we went back to really retest it in 2022, and we refined our questions. We added a few more variables. And that's where we got a lot of the things that went into the HBR article as well, including some of the statistics you just showed, like really seeing an impact between teams that have a high use of rituals and those that don't. But I still felt like, well, we're doing this as a survey across people. We call it a cross-sectional survey in my world. And excuse me, that means that you can't necessarily prove excuse me, that's one variable causing the other variable.
Yes, so Connie did what she did best, and she sent us back to more research. And we did that a lot, actually, and we'll talk about it later, but that was one of the things that I, both had to learn the very hard way about academic rigor, but also really loved, where you were like, no, when we go out to the world with this, we got to be sure of what we're saying, because, we want to have that moral standpoint and that, level of excellence that says we can prove this without any shadow of the doubt. We're not making this stuff up. We are certain of what we're saying. And so we went back for a field study.
That's right. And in the field study, what we did was actually implement rituals in groups that didn't have them already. And that was the thing that allowed me to feel more comfortable using what we call causal language, like saying things like rituals make a difference. Now, one field study in one group of people also doesn't prove it to be true for every group across the world. But when you compare the cross-sectional survey results with this field survey, plus all the other research that in related areas that's been done, I think we've got a pretty sure footing here to make these kinds of conclusions.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's walk everyone through what we've learned. We're going to start with, first of all, talking about what is a ritual, just in case we've been throwing that word around. And maybe we don't all have a shared definition of what it means. So let's start there for just a second. So, of course, rituals is a word that we hear a lot coming from the spiritual world. They are collective activities that members of a team, in this case, not members of a community, but members of a team, engage in regularly. But the difference between a meeting and a ritual is that these activities are given meaning. And we're going to talk about what that meaning can sound like later. But, I always like to compare that. I love the metaphor of like doing your bed, because there are habits, there are routines, and then there are rituals. And I think it's good to kind of explain the difference. If you just wake up and you do your bed out of habit, it's fine. It's good for you. Your room is tidy, but it doesn't have a lot of meaning. But if when you make your bed, it is perceived by you as a form of self-care, for example, suddenly the act of making your bed transcends habits or routines. It becomes a ritual because it has a meaning associated with it. I think that's a easy way of understanding things. So what you'll see is that when we look into the kind of rituals that we studied, and we did a mix of both personal and professional rituals, and I'll talk through them and why we chose these ones in a second. But a lot of them are going to sound like meetings you might already run or things that are already in your schedule as a team. And we're going to talk about the difference between it's a meeting and it's a ritual is around the frequency, the adherence to it, and the importance of attributing meaning. And as a company, we've had the chance to observe and implement rituals with many organizations, including the wonderful company that allowed us to do this for the field study. And so what we tried to choose is we selected the rituals that we find most commonly. Now, even us as a company, so as Cosmic Centers, there are other rituals that are a bit more unique, a bit more branded, but we wanted to choose things that everybody would recognize, and they'd quickly be able to tell us whether their team conducts and adheres to these rituals. So on the personal side, nothing's gonna, shock anyone, but what shocks us is how few people actually do this religiously, so to speak. But we looked at things like, do we celebrate personal milestones, whether it's birthdays or big achievements or personal milestones. We looked at if we share background about each other, about our cultures, which holidays we like to celebrate, what food we like to eat, anything around our cultural backgrounds. And Connie and I did a lot of that over the last 3 years. Do we check emotionally? Do we ask each other how we feel authentically? Do we actually wait for the answer? One of our favorite questions is, how are you really? Do we use prompts or activities that allow us to get to know each other better? And do we engage in social events or time spent together that does not revolve around work? And on the professional side, things like welcoming members, having a clear onboarding process, checking in, whether on a daily or a weekly basis, running team retrospectives, creating explicit spaces for knowledge sharing. And then the kind of balance to personal sharing is, do we share about each other's professional backgrounds? Do we learn about what we are able to bring to the team and what skills and experience and expertise we have beyond what our current role is? And those are the 11 rituals that we included in our scale. And before we kind of talk about the details of it, Connie, beyond maybe, or within those 11 rituals or beyond them, what is a ritual that you particularly love?
Well, I have to say, when you first came to me to talk about rituals, it wasn't a term that I was using in my work life, but I immediately thought of one that has had a really powerful impact on my experience in a group that's called, not very cleverly, Groups Group. So when I was in graduate school at Harvard, my mentor, Richard Hackman, was a renowned scholar of teams and groups. And he had a research forum for doctoral students as well as faculty. Whoever was interested in studying teams could show up at this. We had people from across the Boston area who would come. In fact, that's how I met Mark. But he instituted a ritual at the beginning of every meeting where we had to share good news. And I could already feel people's eyes rolling, because that's part of the thing we have to accept and understand about rituals is sometimes they feel kind of like forced and hokey, right? But Richard was the opposite of touchy-feely as a person. And so I figured, well, he must know something. Like, we should probably give this a try. And so it turned out to be this beautiful practice that we did at the beginning of every meeting. And the purpose of our meetings was to rip each other's research apart, by the way, you should know. Like, it was, we were there to give each other constructive feedback and challenge each other on our work. And so we started off every meeting with good news, and it could be about I just got to revise and resubmit, which is like a big deal in a paper, or I just got asked to do a presentation at this prestigious conference. Or it could be personal, like, hey, I just got a new puppy. It didn't matter. But by forcing everybody to go around the room at the beginning, we established that we were human beings beyond our work. And also that, it was a safe place for us to celebrate each other, which made me feel like I had support in a career that often you feel pretty isolated. So that's my favorite ritual.
I love that. I mean, studying human connection has been at the center of what we do as a company. Tala asked in the crowd, what is their favorite rituals? And of course, Maya Mahfouz, who was supporting us with all the research, had cosmic conversations. And I think it is a small sign of the universe that I received the 3rd edition of Cosmic Conversations today, straight from Italy. They were shipped to us finally. And I really think, the example that you gave, this idea that we learn about each other as humans, we start to see each other as 3D characters. We understand what is going on in each other's lives. It provides so much context for us to be better colleagues, better friends, better partners, better critics, whatever it is. And human connection is really at the center of our work. So I love that you picked a ritual around that. And I see a few others in the chat here. Stand-ups. I love me a good stand-up. I'm a Scrum practitioner, so all rituals that come from Scrum are close to my heart. Let's see, sharing good news as well. Cosmic Conversations, of course. Yeah.
Well, what's your favorite though, Marilyn? You have to answer the question too.
Okay, I'm going to give you 2. I'm going to give you my favorite from like Cosmic Centaurs, like weird ones, oh my God, I have so many. And then I'm going to give you one that for me is one of the first ones that I love to implement in teams. Let's start with Cosmic Centaurs. I mean, we have a lot of really cute ones. We throw ice cream parties when we win new clients or we have something to celebrate. At this point with the HBR article, we joke that we need an ice cream truck. Equivalent to the joy we're experiencing. But one that I really love, mostly because I'm not, like you were saying, Richard Hackman wasn't like a softy-feely person. I'm not like a erupt into dance kind of human, although I am a positive person. But one ritual that we started very early on and that I still like to remind the team of is before a big important workshop, we listen to the song Cosmic Girl by Jamiroquai. It's our theme song. We just dance to it and we feel a bit silly and it removes a bit of the stress. And I think that's a really cute one. And the one that I really love to implement with all teams is retrospectives. And for those who don't know what that is, a retrospective is when a team comes together to reflect on a certain period, let's say the previous month, and they're not allowed to talk about the work or the output. They can only talk about the process. How did we work together? Did we communicate at the right times? Did we behave in the right ways? Was our process, well designed? What can we improve? And we run it as a start, stop, continue. So what should we start doing that we haven't been? What are some behaviors or process elements that we want to stop? And also, of course, celebrating the good ones. And honestly, I've seen this ritual transform teams from going to, finger pointing, blaming behind closed doors, never really taking ownership or responsibility for anything, also not having collective ownership of something, to really just having the space to finally not just vent about what's bothering them, but do something about it. And of course, the first retrospective is always a bit painful and it needs a bit of a hand-holding. By the 3rd one, I kid you not, by the 3rd one, these teams are nothing like the teams we met. And it's just, for me, although it's a very kind of functional project management problem, I find that it creates the most beautiful space and teams really become teams because of it.
That's great.
Yeah. And I see a lot more comments in the chat here. Lunch and learns, absolutely.
I love it.
And someone is saying here, yeah, not everyone feels comfortable. And I think you called that out too. I think we'll talk about it. Rituals are sometimes a little bit uncomfortable at first. And that's okay. It feels a bit weird, and we're being asked to do something that isn't just the natural flow of things, but they do pay off, as we finally demonstrated.
Well, let's get back to the research, and we'll share what we got.
So let's start, Connie, by explaining to everyone how we looked at the data and how we use these 11 rituals in order to understand the behaviors and the various impacts.
Yes. So we had the list of 11, and we looked at various ways of analyzing this data. And ultimately, we decided, based on the metrics, that it was sufficient to just combine them. So you could break them out by the personal ones versus the professional ones, but overall, they tended to work together as a whole. So we're now calling this a team ritual scale that anyone can use. Oh, by the way, we have a research report, I should mention. We'll go back to that at the end as well, but that's where you can get a lot more of this data, as well as the ritual scale. We have like a little one pager that describes how to implement it and measure it in your organization. But in any case, so we graded people from like a 1, 2, 3 in terms of, a 0, 1, 2 in terms of whether they had no ritual, a little bit of that ritual, or quite a lot of that ritual. And then that gave us these different ranges when we added them up. And so you can see here that, we pretty much straightforwardly just tried to group these teams based on whether they were low, moderate, or high in usage. And some of the metrics we used the full scale from 0 to 22, but for the most part, we'd use these 3 groupings because it really helped us simplify and understand what was going on in the different teams. And we didn't do this intentionally. It just worked out because of our big sample of almost 1,000 people, that we have about a third, a third, a third in each of these categories. And so that gave us the statistical heft to be able to come up with some of these other analyses where you can see here, this is a bar chart where we got those statistics from, where you're comparing the groups that had high levels of rituals. So that didn't mean they did every one of those. That's not the expectation, but they did, like half of them at least. And that's where we see a huge difference. I mean, you can even see just visually on this chart here, the numbers are very, very different between those people work on those types of teams with high usage versus low usage, and all these other variables that we have. So here you can see, running down the list here, 23% higher commitment to the purpose. And that is so powerful, because that's the saying that just doing these things as a team makes me really believe in our mission more. And you could say on paper you believe in it, but it's these rituals that make you feel it really more in your blood. It also boosted psychological safety, increased the amount of knowledge we knew about each other. And by the way, we measured knowledge, not just like, do I know the other people I work with on my team, but how well do they know me? So we really tried to make sure this was a mutual knowledge. Certainly people's job satisfaction was higher, and they just reported like less often considering taking another job, which is a big deal, especially if you're trying to retain your best workers. So we see all this just based on this variable about the usage of rituals. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. And I think, the number was somewhere between 7 and 11, which sounds like a lot. But if you just think about what rituals we are talking about, some of them, of course, are very recurrent, like a daily or a weekly stand-up, a monthly retrospective. But some of them are also quite sporadic or ad hoc, right? Like when someone's birthday is coming up, when a new person joins the team. So as you said, in reality, like the ones that are core and consistent and a strong part of the cadence, that ends up being 4 or 5 of them. And if you think about it, it is not impossible to do. Although, of course, we will talk about the fact that, as we know, not a lot of people manage to do that. And we'll talk about what we have learned and studied to be a great process for implementing the rituals. But lingering just a second longer on the results themselves, what we also saw and what you started to explain, Connie, is that these rituals also increase personal and professional knowledge. And there's a lot of research, including Crampton's research, that shows how increasing mutual knowledge in teams also improves their performance and their effectiveness. She did amazing research post 9/11, actually, on showing how increasing mutual knowledge in teams that was commissioned by the CAA, and she showed that if you could increase mutual knowledge in teams, you could defeat the terrorists, which they had failed to do that day. And funny enough, little anecdote here, teams with more women on them are better at increasing mutual knowledge. Would you be surprised by that? Maybe not. So there is a lot of great benefit in increasing personal and professional knowledge in and of itself. We didn't need to demonstrate that. That was already there in the literature. But what we showed is that conducting these rituals, again, we see a great impact on both personal and professional knowledge. And we saw that in the survey, of course, and then we also saw it in the field study that we conducted, where in that field study, essentially what we did was we had 3 teams within the organization with whom we did run rituals, both from the personal and professional categories. And then we had a control group. So we had a team that we didn't work with directly, but they were committed to taking the surveys at the same time as everybody else. And that would allow us to show how these rituals were impacting these metrics in the groups where we were doing the work versus those that were just the control group. And again, you can see that here, both in the survey and in the field study, great impact on personal knowledge. And there are a lot of beautiful quotes from...
Before you get to the quote, though, actually, I just want to point out one thing from this slide and the previous slide that stands out to me, even just listening to you present this, is you can see that the personal knowledge and the survey data, as well as in the field study, was significantly lower to start before rituals compared to the professional knowledge. And that does make sense because these are work teams. And so you would hope they would have some baseline level of professional knowledge about each other. Now, our data would say that even it can be significantly increased through rituals, but you just look at the jump up in personal knowledge. And so much of my research above and beyond this particular project is on relationships at work. And I'm not advocating, to be clear, that everyone becomes best friends with their teammates. So we're not talking about personal knowledge, like I know all of your deepest, darkest secrets, but it's just being able to really appreciate where the other person is coming from, their tendencies, their preferences, the kinds of things that get them really excited. Like, that's really valuable to know when you're working together. So it may be helpful I know your degree. It may be helpful I know where you worked before this. But like, if I understand the way that you like to work and the kinds of things that will really to bring out the best in you, like, that's the kind of stuff that we want to make sure we get to. And I haven't found a better way to do that, to pull out that kind of personal knowledge, than something like a ritual.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, some of the, one of the rituals that we ran with these teams, of course, is these prompt questions. And even we were surprised. So we allow the teams to choose the questions that they wanted to ask each other. Of course, depending on cultures and on context, and we saw this in the comments as well from the audience, some people might be cringe. We've seen some people, outright refuse to participate in a personal knowledge sharing ritual. So we wanted to be mindful of, what they would be comfortable with. And so rather than impose the questions, we allowed the team members to choose them. We thought they'd stay pretty kosher. Questions that we would normally ask to start with would be things like, I don't know, what's your favorite snack? Or how do you like to receive feedback? Or what's a value you share with one of your parents? I mean, those sound safe enough, so to speak. But we saw the team that we worked with on this one, at least the one that I was supporting, they picked really deep questions. I remember one where I think we all ended up in tears, where one of them asked, like, what's something you would change about your childhood? And the stuff that was shared in that room was just incredible. And also the connections that were made, and realizing like how many difficult things everybody had gone through, and the team was really transformed by that. We had some of the people we interviewed after this told us that these moments of connections literally transformed their relationship to their team, made them choose to stay in their job. So that idea of like reducing quitting thoughts, we got direct quotes off of that. It also allowed them, some of the quotes we got, okay, we were able to open up and share more honestly, but I think what was beautiful is people said they got out of their own head, they got out of their own narrative, and they allowed them to build bridges and to create connection with the people around them. And we have one of these quotes over here that we're showing. whoops, remove that instead of showing it, which is this check-in calls became more than updates. We paused, we connected, and as a consequence, our team became more engaged and supportive, which is something that had been missing before. And this idea of when we get to know each other, we see each other as humans, not as task doers, not as peers or competition. We see each other as full individuals, and we support each other in ways that we would never have done before. So really can't send out that message strong enough in building the human connection on your teams. It's one of the ingredients of the magic sauce.
That's right. All right, it's time for another question. This one I get to ask you.
Okay.
All right, my co-author colleague, what surprised you about this research and what we found?
Yeah, I mean, I thought about this a lot. First, I want to say the outcomes that we found didn't surprise me because I believed them in my body. Like as you said, when I came to you, I was so energetic about this because I'd experienced it firsthand. I was just waiting to prove, what was there. And so in that sense, I was just relieved rather than surprised when the results came out. But I think that for me, my answer about what surprised me lies in the process of our work together. I'm a geek, and I always say, like, I love academia in another life. You and I have discussed this. I would have been a professor. I would have done, the PhD and gone in that world, because I just think it's so beautiful to be able to look into something with the depth and thoroughness that comes from the academic process. And I think that what was beautiful about our partnership, and it surprised me in the best of ways, was that we were able to bring those two worlds. Me as a practitioner, very excited about things, making conclusions I shouldn't, but also kind of being willing. And you'd be like, we need another 500 responses. And I said, let's go. And you're like, we need a company to run a field study in. And I'm like, give me 2 weeks. And on the one hand, I think like that partnership worked so well because we brought the best of both worlds together. And rather than that, because it could have gone the other way. I could have been like, oh my God, I can't believe Connie's asking me for more research. I can't do this anymore. I'm done. And you could have gone the other way, saying like, these people don't know what they're doing. Like they don't understand the process. I'm done. And I think that's what great teams do, right? They bring the best of everybody's superpower. And I think we really succeeded in doing that, even though we have never met in person.
I know, it's amazing. Well, thank you, by the way. That was such a beautiful tribute to our relationship and the give and take that we did experience for sure throughout. I think in terms of what surprised me about it, well, first of all, I do feel like this whole time I was just going with my instinct versus necessarily like having a certain plan. And I really like that I just felt connected to you, and I did feel we had this mutual respect that made me want to keep working with you. But I think what surprised me is actually our findings and how strong they are, because I did not go into this like you, a true believer in the value of rituals. And I felt like I was always the like voice of caution, like let's just, let's not fall into confirmation bias here. Let's make sure we actually have some data that supports it. And I want to just say another explicit shout out to Maya Mahfouz, who did endless statistics and analyses at my behest to make sure we weren't saying things that had no empirical proof behind them. So, I think I'm sitting here today sounding like I'm this like, ritual salesperson, which it was not how I expected to end up. I thought there was certainly reasons to believe that these kinds of practices would make a positive difference, but I just wasn't expecting the data to be this clear based on really, a set of 11 different, rituals that we tested, and of course, with only like the survey method to begin with, and then the interview. I mean, the field study really helped me feel more comfortable saying all these things. But I think that surprised me. I'm also just surprised by how delightful the process was of working with you, someone I've never met and who lives across the world from me.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. It was truly delightful. And it was, I think, because we both felt really committed to the purpose of what we're doing. And I do think that, and we know that, this disagreeing on the task, like being like, oh, I'm not so sure, we need more, we need less, we know that leads to more productive outcomes for teams. And I think we demonstrated that so strongly in being open to being challenged by each other, and just keep doing the work and get to where we're going to land.
Well, and I'll also just make a pitch for like common incentives, right? Like neither one of us were paid for this research. None of our beautiful, amazing participants were paid, like not even in the field study. Nobody filled out a survey. So, I feel like this was the kind of labor of love that can really be inspiring.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And to me, it really taught me, and the team will laugh when they hear me say this now. It taught me the gift of giving things time. I live in Dubai, everything's fast paced. We operate in minutes here. We move really, really, really fast. And I found myself often in stand-ups where they'd be like, so what's happening with the rituals recently? I'm like, guys, this is a scope. You're going to have to respect it. It's going to take time. You got to get off my back, and this idea, and we'll talk about it actually, like being stubborn about the things we have faith about. Yeah. And trusting that the process will lead you where it needs to go is a beautiful lesson for me as well. Yeah. I love this question. So speaking then of what, again, did or didn't surprise us, of course, it's not surprising to know that, as we saw, 2/3 of our survey respondents don't really have high rates of usage of the rituals. And so a big part of what we then were focused on is, if we're going to come and tell people rituals are amazing, look at all these great things that they can do for you, we also had to be honest about the fact that implementing rituals is hard, that not everybody's successful at it, and that we needed to be able to provide a framework, a process by which people could at least attempt to successfully do this. And of course, at first, when we try to implement things like this, the objections are there. We heard this in the comment. Oh, this sounds a bit wonky. Like, I'm not sure I want to answer these stupid questions. Or I'm already in meetings from 9 to 5. Like, what more do you want from me? Or sometimes the first time we try a ritual, it just doesn't fit right. And then we abandon it. So, in our experience as practitioners, we've seen this over and over and over again. And so a big part of what we focused on as well for our article, and through the field study that was really helpful in proving that the process works, is really looking at, well, what is a good process? What can we tell leaders who listen to us and then say, okay, I'm gonna do this. I'm serious about this. I believe in it. How could we guide them in a process that would work? And that's kind of also the core of what the article is about.
Yeah, so let's tell them.
Yeah, let's jump into it. So we have a 5-step process for everyone. And I do see there's a great question in the audience, which we'll come to at the end, around the relation to organizational, issues. But let's start with what a good process looks like, and then we can look at hurdles. But one of the first questions that I was curious about, and the reason why this research is so strong, and is because we didn't just look at the variables that we thought were useful. We also threw in every possible other variable to try and see if we would, find that actually there is this other thing over there that influences these factors more than the rituals do. So we threw in demographic factors, team composition, regional distribution, do they work remotely or not? We really tried to throw in a lot of factors. And one that, we felt was important from the beginning, and the data did show this as well, is the importance of an inspirational leader. And by this we mean that, of course, rituals are a team activity, but at some point, somebody, and it doesn't have to be the team manager who is the leader, by the way, but generally it happens to be, someone has to say, I believe in this enough that I'm going to keep the ship steered in the right direction despite the waves, the rain, the whatever it is. It's not going to happen on its own. If rituals was easy, then everybody would be getting them right. And so keeping the team kind of aligned with this idea that this is going to be good for us. We're going to have to do it. And I believe in it. You really need an individual who will step up and do that. And we really saw the data, really showed us that when there was an inspirational leader, the likelihood of having teams with high rituals usage was there. We saw it in our field study. One of the leaders in the organization was convinced, magically. And without his buy-in and without his focus, we might not have made it through to the other side. So the first one, and you'll see a lot of spiritual puns, so to speak, in our text, but lead with faith. If you believe that this is right for you, let your faith guide you through the turbulent waters. It's not going to be easy from day one.
Absolutely. The commitment to it is so important at the start.
Yeah. And voicing that commitment, by the way, saying, team, we're going to start this new thing. And by the way, it's going to be painful and you're going to hate me for the first few weeks. I promise we can revisit it if it doesn't work, but you're going to have to trust me. There's a bit of you're going to have to trust me. I was mentoring someone just this week who's a manager of a small global team. And they were sharing how they're like, oh, I know I need to do this, but I'm hesitating. Everybody's going to get upset about it. And I'm like, listen, if you don't believe in it, don't bother. But if you do, bite the bullet. That's your job. That's why you make the big bucks. That's why you're the leader.
Yeah, it's like, don't just like slip them in either so you can back away from it if they don't work out. Like actually like declare it. Like, we're a commitment. We're doing this.
Yeah, totally. So the next one, and we talked about it a little bit earlier with my making the bed metaphor, is this meaning piece. Human beings, one of the beautiful things about us is that we are able to assign meaning to things that, don't intrinsically have it. And so, that's why I said a lot of rituals can sound like meetings, but they're not meetings, because we do more than just get together every day and share our updates. No, we come together because this will allow us to have connection, transparency, inspection, clarity. And once we start to assign meaning to these things, they take on a whole new dimension. And in our work, we kind of have these 5 categories. They're a bit of a catch-all, right? Like we've rarely found a ritual that doesn't fit in one of these. And so they're just a good guide. Think about rituals that correspond to each of these categories. And you mentioned our report, Connie. In our report, which you can download on both of our websites, there is a list of rituals that are associated with each of these. You can also find this on our website, on our ritual bank, where you can, there's a little filter and you can find rituals that connect to each of these 5 categories of meaning. And of course, when I say strategy and planning and business performance, it sounds boring, but actually what we mean by that, what does it mean to have a ritual that is focused on strategy? It means that you have a ritual that is focused on the end goal, the purpose of your organization, what you're trying to accomplish in the world. What does it mean to have a ritual connected to business performance? It means that you are focused on really guiding your organization to be great at executing, to be great at delivering, to be great at creating value for your customers, for your employees, for your suppliers, for your ecosystem. So you want to, of course, our categories are meant to be easy to understand by all and simple, but you want to think about them in these terms. Learning and growth, the knowledge-based view of the firm says that we trade in our freedom in order to gain knowledge. That's why we that's why we're employed in certain places. And so human beings want opportunities for learning, for growth, for self-development, and for connection. That's our 5th category around team engagement. So really you can think about what rituals do you have in place that support each of these goals and attributes meaning to them.
I just want to put a fine point on that. Like, I think actually this is one of the most underused tricks to getting rituals to stick, which is to actually explicitly say, we are doing this team retrospective for blank reason, or we are doing this happy hour for this reason. And that what will happen then is that, it just clarifies and helps people buy in because they probably want whatever that outcome is. But it also aligns everything you do within that interaction towards that purpose. Instead of being kind of vague and scattershot, And then the final thing it allows you to do is actually sort of measure, like, did we actually get closer to that goal that we said this ritual is, there to do? So again, when you say it this way, it can kind of like just good basic business management, but think about each individual ritual. What is its purpose? And then making sure everything is aligned to it, I think will bring a lot more people into the rituals game.
Yeah, I agree. And by the way, something that is a good practice too is every time you have a new joiner, and I do this a lot, like we have a new team member, they come to their first stand-up, I actually sit around for 10 minutes and explain the why and what we're trying to accomplish from it. Even if it's boring. And of course, as the team grows now, I don't have to do it anymore. Other team members do it. But repeating the meaning behind it, as you say, starting the gathering with intention, the we are gathered here today, really means something, right? Beautiful. So then what? All right. So we have our faith, we've selected our rituals, and they're imbued with meaning. And as often as possible, as I mentioned before, we've allowed teams to co-design these and co-select them. And by the way, we have a worksheet on our website that allows you to run this as a workshop with your team to kind of determine your cadence. I think what comes next is then being religious about them. And that's where most people will fail. It's like setting a New Year's resolution. You got to put in the discipline behind it. It's all good to start with good intentions. And here, what I'm going to say is going to sound so obvious, but first of all, put all of your rituals in your calendar. We love to put them in a different color or add an emoji to them. It just makes them a tiny bit more joyful. Second of all, as a leader, and this is where your hierarchical role also comes in, the expectation should be that people treat rituals with the same reverence as they do for business meetings, as they do for client meetings, as they do for deadlines. Rituals are not this thing that is a nice to have. Oh yeah, like when we're free, we have nothing else to do, we connect with each other. But when the pressure's up and we have deliverables, we cancel all of them. Because the second you allow that to happen, you're actually saying they're not that important at all.
And you're saying the goal of the ritual isn't important too, by the way. You're basically like conveying that signal to people. Well, we were once interested in doing that, but now we're not anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And, I always say we have two currencies in life. We have money and time. And when you want to look at what a company values or what a leader's strategy is focused on, you should look at where they're putting their budget and how they're spending their time. And so the second you say, you know what, rituals, we can cancel it this week, it's okay, you're essentially saying we don't have budget for this problem. And it's really important that you treat it as in the same way as you would any business meeting. And of course, that doesn't mean that just because you're disciplined and structured about participation doesn't mean you're not adaptive and agile. Rituals may need to change as you scale, as you grow, as your priorities shift. Some rituals that served you will no longer serve you. Maybe it was good and great to celebrate birthdays in a team when there was 4 of us, but now we're trying to expand that to the whole department. It doesn't work like that. We also have a lot of, really beautiful examples also of adapting them to cultural contexts. An example that was one of really interesting one was, obviously we're in a part of the world where not everybody partakes in consuming alcohol, and a lot of like the social rituals of teams are like, we're going to go out for after work drinks or whatever that is. And so building rituals that are inclusive, that take into account cultural differences and preferences, but also changing them over time. So coming back 3 months in and saying, or a year in and saying, you know what, we loved having monthly retrospective, but we now feel like every other month is enough. Or this sounded like a good idea, but we haven't really kept up with this ritual. It feels like a failure every time we don't do it. Maybe we should cancel it. So really remaining agile, because in the end, what you're building is an operating system for the team, and the operating system needs to evolve to accommodate for what is changing and how the team wants to run itself, so to speak. And then, of course, the idea is to try and make this an organizational practice. So again, what we've seen a lot is that these things work really well when they start off as a team effort, like an individual leader and their team who decide to try things out, because they then create the pilot, the success story that can then be shared to the rest of the organization. And what we saw in the organization that we helped and we worked with during the field study is that, of course, we started with a few teams, but when we were able to then show the benefits, and this was even before we had all this data, just the benefits from like anecdotal feedback members themselves, again, the CEO of the company stepped in and said, okay, clearly 3 months in, this works. And now we're going to make it an organizational practice because we were able to tell these incredible success stories. And so for us, preach, if you think it works, teach other teams, share the rituals, and make sure that everybody can bring that practice to life within their teams. And I just want to add on this a conclusion that we also drew in our article that I think is very beautiful, and I want to say it out loud. And actually, my team wrote a beautiful article about this, is that in addition to everything we've researched and demonstrated, what we've also found is that rituals are a great source of certainty and stability for teams in a hectic, ever-changing environment. Unfortunately, when we were even writing this article, a lot of members of my team were in situations where there was war around them, the most extreme form of uncertainty. And they wrote an article, and the day I read it, it really brought me to tears. And I shared that with them, where we asked each of our team members to say what is something that they do to cope with uncertainty. We were really trying to write this as an article for our community. Yeah. And actually, I think every single one of them mentioned one of our rituals. And it was both heartbreaking and beautiful. Now, hopefully no one ever has to experience that. But we all do experience uncertainty to varying degrees. And we found that engine of the rituals, the certainty of the cadence, that we will come together and we will do things meaningfully, really provided that stabilizing force. And so maybe one day we'll be able to study that more directly, but that's at least an intuition that we had around the beauty of rituals.
That's right.
Yeah. So with that, that's kind of our 5-step process. If you want to read the details, you can both read the article and the report that we put out there. There were a couple of questions from the audience that I want us to get to. There was one really, really good one. So I'm going to remove these slides here and bring that in. So one of our audience member asked, wait, hold on. I lost it. Here we go. Do you have any insights on how this research was informed by employees' overall sentiments about their organizations or leadership? Do you find that rituals can overcome less positive organizational sentiment and trust issues? Connie, do you want to start?
Oh, yeah. Okay, this is for me. So it's a question whether if you're in an organization where you don't have that supportive culture, is that? Well, so this gets back to a little bit of what you were just saying, and in terms of our last tip about spreading the word. Often, just even in my research on psychological safety, someone will say to me, well, my entire organization is unsafe, so what do I do? And I say, start with your team. And so I do think that a group of people, even if you're not the head of that team, can collectively decide that this is something that you want to do and create your own little pocket of strong community that is committed to each other, that shows the care and mutual respect that will drive and enhance your team performance. And so do I think it's going to solve the entire organization's problems if you have a team that does this? No, but I do think that good things do also spread. And so, it might be your best way to try to change the overall culture. But I also, want the message to be, don't wait until the culture is perfect. Like, just jump in there and start doing it in the small, the small group that you can get your arms around.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's Gallup in their engagement data research, they show that individual managers control 70% of the variance on employee engagement. In normal speak, what this means is that, of course, the overall organizational environment impacts, engagement, psychological safety, etc. But how a manager chooses to deal with their team impacts it a lot more. So 70% of that grade is associated with who your manager is. And as you said, you don't need permission to be a good leader. You don't need the organization to fix your problems. If you do, maybe you don't want to be a manager. Like, that's not what managers are meant to do. I know sometimes we feel disabled by our context, but leading, and we did say lead with face. Leading isn't about your job or what permission or power you've been given. It's about doing what's right by your team or your function or whatever, your department. And so you don't have to wait for the company to give you permission for anything, especially if you think you're doing something that is going to be positive.
Right.
A couple other questions for us here. Did we find that specific cultures had impact on the data? So where people came from?
This is really a question that we can ask Maya separately, but to my recollection, we did not. We did not find the difference. Also, we didn't have, like, I would love to see at least 100 people from each country before I could do country by country analysis. But you're shaking your head, so you recall?
No, there was no impact. Zero. That we know of. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, there's all these data points that we looked at. So again, like the diversity of the team, their geographical distribution, where people came from. I think we looked at both where they work and their country of origin. We asked them both of those questions, and we didn't find any significant incidents on the data. Connie, one more question, and then I have a bunch of questions to wrap us up. But what advice do you have for individual contributors who want more team rituals to convince their leaders to adopt rituals?
Well, this is kind of getting back to what I said before too. Like, I think anybody can initiate a ritual. Like, should you get your manager's buy-in? Yes, but that to me is like a one-on-one saying, hey, look, here's this article. Harvard Business Review published it. It must have some validity, hopefully. So let's try something like this, and start with something that's going to be helpful that you can tie to your strategic goal, your operational goal, or whatever it is. Like, don't start maybe with, hey, I just think this will help people bond, even though I'm like a huge fan of that concept. But I think if you don't have them to begin with and you're not the leader of a team, it's easier to go with like a business impact kind of ritual. And then just, say, here's, we're going to try it, and make sure you get like the buy-in, and you may have to do a little personal influence to get everybody on board, but, just try it. And there's really no reason you shouldn't.
I couldn't agree more. You don't need to be the boss to lead, is the short of it. Just go ahead. Ask for forgiveness, not permission. What's the worst that could happen? You wasted everybody's, 1 hour that you brought them to do this ritual together. Big deal. Love that. I have a few questions that I prepared for us, Connie, as well, as we kind of come to an hour of us chatting and we get to our wrap up. But we've been sitting here talking about how amazing rituals are. I'm going to be a bit controversial, but what's the ritual you don't like?
What's a ritual I don't like? I'm trying to figure out how to say this and not get myself in trouble. I don't like rituals when, let's say, a meeting that's required, where it is a performance and there's only a token effort to include people's opinions. So again, I'm trying not to get myself in trouble here, but like there's a common ritual that I am forced to participate in that I feel like is a bit of a sham.
Yeah, fake. That's a good one.
All right, I have a question for you. Which ritual, in your experience, is the hardest to pull off? Like, which one is the hardest to implement in your team or the teams that you work with?
That's a tough one. I would say one ritual that I really love is we do this as a team, and this maybe applies a bit more to kind of leadership teams, or at least teams that have access to good data, is that kind of getting together every month to look at data and see how we're doing. You see this also like in e-commerce teams, like anyone who has access to data where we can come and like honestly inspect, like, are we accomplishing our goals or not, like involving numbers.
Yeah.
Especially in this part of the world, maybe it's different in the US, it is incredibly hard to get people to agree to be in that meeting, to show their numbers, to discuss them all together. Part of it is those who do well don't want the others to feel bad. Those who do badly don't know where to get there. So because there's a lot of prep involved in it to get it right and position it and set the right intention, I find that that's one of the hardest to kind of master.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a good one. What do you think made us a great team? You've been studying teams for almost your entire career.
I think what made us a great team is that we just immediately had that respect to listen to each other, and the humility to know that there's a whole world that I know that you don't know, but more importantly, there's a whole world you know that I don't know. And so I never always felt like it was a balance of expertise, even though we had very different worlds.
Yeah, I mean, I learned what Cronbach alpha means and what ANOVA results are.
What's the difference between a scale and a variable? Remember? That was the whole conversation.
Do not test me before our audience. No, and I remember the first few meetings we had, you and Maya would be talking, and like you obviously have a shared language, and I'd be Googling shit silently in the background, be like, you better know what this means by the next time they mention it. To be sure.
All right, so my next question for you is, now that you've entered this world, what's the part of doing research that you enjoy the most?
The interviews. I just love hearing the story. Of course, it's great, like when you get a big data set and things kind of come out of it. But I've always believed, and we do this a lot, anyways, in our work as consultants. We run surveys, but we also talk to people, and I just think like hearing the stories, getting the quotes, the kind of the infinite detail of what happens in the background and how people's perception changes, and I think it's just so beautiful. So I just love hearing their stories. What about you? You've been doing this for a really long time. What's the part that you love the most, and what's the part you dislike?
Let's see. I dislike the first draft of writing the most. It's so hard. It's so much easier to edit. But you were a great writing partner, actually. So that was much less painful this time. But the thing I love the most is I actually have this vision, and I know it does sound super geeky, but like when we get the data in, I love doing interviews, but what I really love is when I get that big data set and I like press the button to see if the results come back significant. It's probably like if you were into video games and like, I don't know, like you figured out how to go beyond a certain level or something. Like I find it very like addictive. Like I really like, oh, what if we tested this? What if we tested this? And again, a lot of these analyses Maya took over this time, but there were still sometimes I got my hands into it, and that's really fun for me.
Well, that shows how complementary we are. We each love a different side of this. All right. And my last question to you is, if you had to just pick one word to capture the last 3 years of working on this, which one would you choose?
Rewarding. And what? Not financially. And I'm only emphasizing that because I want people to know I'm not paid by Cosmic Centaurs. Like it's really important that I try to stay unbiased here. But it was so rewarding. It was fun. I got to know a different part of the world. I got to know your team. I got to know the people we interviewed, and other people through their survey comments. And I just think it's really been just a true pleasure and gave me so much. So I thank you for all of this opportunity you gave me.
I mean, likewise. I always say the great friendships are known by the fact that each person thinks they got the better deal out of it. So I definitely think like I got the better deal here. I learned so much, and I'm a curious person. I live to learn. And you shared so generously, honestly, and you weren't paid. You had no reason to like work with this tiny company from the Middle East you'd never heard of, and yet you gave us a wholehearted chance. And I see, honestly, from the reactions to the article, how many people have posted it before I had seen it.
Oh, wow, that's great.
LinkedIn and tagged me. I was like, wait, what is this article out? What's going on? And that keeps rolling. Like people I saw a post in Spanish. I was like, wait, what? I just see it from the reactions of people, but I think it came from just the generosity of you being willing to explore this with us, and we never would have been able to have this kind of impact if you hadn't. So I'll never be able to tell you how grateful I am.
Oh my gosh. And the same. I mean, the fact that you were rolling up your sleeves and put 3 years into it, like where most people would just check that after 3 months. I mean, you stood the test of time, and your commitment to this and the new data that you were constantly willing to collect and analyze. And I do believe that even though you were super enthusiastic, that if we found that rituals do not work, that you would have been willing to talk about it. And I love the integrity too that you brought to the whole process.
Absolutely. Play long-term games with long-term people, as they say.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And with that, Connie, comes to the end of our time together here today. Once more, it's been a true joy working with you over the last few years. And you're not done with me. I'm going to come back with more. I'm just giving you a little tiny break. And of course, thank you to Maya Mahfouz, Dr. Maya Mahfouz, who got her PhD in the middle of all of this, for doing all the heavy lifting on the research from a data perspective. Marie Nechle, who helped with the field study, and Tala, who in the background was helping me to write the first draft. So it might have looked easy on your side, but I dragged poor Tala into this. But of course, all the centaurs who are maybe still centaurs or are centaurs alumni who contributed along the way. And as you said earlier, everyone who took our surveys, took part in our interviews, and a special company in the Middle East that allowed us to turn their journey into a case study. And a big thank you to those who attended today. As always, the video is available for you to rewatch here, later on our YouTube, on our podcast channel, on our website. And we have so many resources around rituals. The team shared a few of those links, and we have all of them on our website. So if you do want to learn more about how to do this, you can go there. But also, as you've seen, I do not tire of speaking of rituals. So if anybody looking to implement some in their teams and they want to chat about it, I am available to do that. And with that, Connie, thank you very much, and goodbye to our audience.
Thank you.